Early voting is winding down across the country, and in Miami, Florida, President Obama wasn't giving the crowd any excuses not to get it done.
Vote early. If you are registered, you can vote right now at any early voting location. In fact, there's one just 10 minutes away at the International Mall Branch Library.
Rallies with the president and star-studded concerts can certainly help, but the candidates know campaigns can be won and lost by the use of a good ground game. So let's talk about that. I'm joined by former Ted Cruz communications director and CNN political commentator Alice Stewart, along with Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove, an organizer with Moral March to the Polls. Jonathan, by the way, is not endorsing a particular candidate. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
I can't wait to have this conversation, Alice, because I think when we say ground game, a lot of people don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I think of football, right, with a good running back and a running game, but that's not exactly what that is. So can you explain what a ground game is?
Well, just like football, a presidential campaign can be won or lost based on a good ground game. And the key to this is getting out there early and identifying voters through good data and good voter contact early on, and establishing good door-to-door operations, good phone operations, and also as well identifying voters and getting out good mail pieces to them. And what we're seeing in key states, Iowa particular for the Republican side, seeing good, tremendous numbers. They've knocked on tens of thousands of doors in the past few days and will continue to do so, hundreds of thousands, as we get through Election Day, and that's critical. Now, at the same time, I will say that the Clinton campaign has been working hard. They do have a great ground game, and they worked on it for many, many months. But at this stage of the game, it's about motivating voters. It's not about persuading. It's not about getting the right message to the voters at this time. It's about persuading them, motivating them to get out and vote. And that's what we're seeing with Donald Trump, as well as other key surrogates on the Republican side. And we're seeing good numbers with early voting and absentee voting on the Republican side.
So Jonathan, so what is your part of the ground game? What specifically do you do?
Well, for the ground game here in North Carolina, the ground has certainly been shaped by legislation over the last few years. The NAACP here in North Carolina has been fighting voter suppression since a bill was passed in 2013. And so we celebrated a victory this summer, a victory that expanded early voting and made it possible for people to vote without a photo ID. And so we have been educating people about that and mobilizing them, making a voting plan and getting folks to the polls.
So how specifically do you do that, Jonathan? Do you go door to door and then people invite you in and say, hey, let's talk about this divisive election?
Well, we're a justice organization, so we've been building a moral fusion coalition in North Carolina of people, both Republican, Democrat, and Independent, who really want to see issues that affect not only African Americans, but all marginalized people and poor people in our state. And so that coalition has many partners that have committed to educating people. I'm a minister in our congregations. We're educating people about the voting laws. We have a Souls to the Polls program where on the 2 Sundays of early voting, people literally come together to worship and then go together to march to the polls. This has been All Saints Day in the church, and on All Saints Day we remember the martyrs, those who've died, and certainly in the 20th century people died for the right to vote. Jimmy Lee Jackson and Viola Liuzzo, black and white folks, were willing to lay down their lives so that people could vote. We really believe that the attempts to suppress the vote is an offense to those people's sacrifice, and so we're doing all that we can to make people aware of their right to vote and to get them out to do it.
Alice, how important are people like Jonathan to the democratic process?
I think it's critical to encourage voters of all, Republican or Democrat, to get out and vote. It's such an important right. And to his idea about specific issues, that's one thing that the Trump campaign has done very well with, and both sides, but specifically being able to identify voters based on the issues they are concerned with, whether it is Second Amendment rights, whether it's life, whether it's marriage, whatever the key issue, they're able to identify that while they're going door to door and being able to message exactly what these voters want to hear and how Donald Trump will be able to run as president and be president based on the issues that they're concerned with. A lot of people aren't familiar with the issues, and so the more you can educate them on the issues and where the candidates stand, you're going to be able to persuade them to get to the polls, and that's the key issue. It's not a secret that both of these candidates don't have high favorabilities. They're not very well liked, and to be honest, neither one of them are very trustworthy. So it's a matter of persuading them on the issues that are important to them and motivating them to get out and vote, and that's the key in these last few days.
Jonathan, we have heard that voters aren't so enthusiastic, especially in early voting in North Carolina. What are you seeing?
Well, I think there's a great deal of enthusiasm. Part of the challenge here in North Carolina is that though we did win back days of early voting, there has been continued attempt to suppress the vote, and so our Board of Elections here have certainly for the first 7 days, reduced the number of sites and moved sites away from HBCU campuses, moved sites away from African American communities where people have traditionally voted in a very intentional way to suppress certain votes. This was thoroughly litigated in the courts over the last 3 years, and the court was absolutely clear that African Americans have been targeted with, as they said, almost surgical precision, as well as being clear that that to use party as a proxy for race is itself discriminatory. We have a lot of things that are being debated, but some things have been decided, and what we're trying to say is that voting rights are a moral issue, not a left or a right issue, but a right or a wrong issue, and we want to see people of all parties stand against this voter suppression that's happening here in North Carolina and in other places.
So, Alice, I have to ask this question of you. What's wrong with making voting as easy as possible for all Americans?
I think the key with this is to make sure that it is easy, but it's also free and fair. Fair is the key. I don't believe the election process is rigged. I don't believe it's crooked. I don't believe there are efforts to suppress the votes, but I do think that I was Deputy Secretary of State in Arkansas, and I know how seriously each and every Secretary of State in this country takes their responsibility to run free and fair elections, and that's the key, is to make sure that they're free and easy to vote, but also that they're fair, and I think that's the key. That's what our right to vote is so critical and so important, but at the same time, it has to be done in a fair way, and that's what these efforts to make sure, whether we're talking about specific hours of the polls or whether we're talking about checking voter ID, it's all in an effort to make free and fair elections, which are so critical, especially this election, because we always say every election is the most important one, but I think so much is on the line during this election this year, and I think the importance of making sure that everything goes above reproach. That's the goal of Secretary of States around the country, certainly the campaigns and the candidates, and every voter wants the same thing.
All right, I have to leave it there. Alice Stewart, Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove, thanks for your efforts. I appreciate you both being here.